Hey everybody, welcome back to the ProgCast with Gregg Bendian. I am your host and really your fanboy musicologist when it comes to talking about the emergence of what people now refer to openly as jazz rock fusion, which I think we'll get back to that later in this segment as to what people were calling things, because now I've heard so many different versions of what we called it back in the day and of whatever relevance that is. But I think it's very interesting to talk about that with one of the guys who was there at the beginning of things and who has continued to be a custodian of an important body of music, that of Mr. Steve Morse and the Dixie Dregs. So, of course, I'm talking about bassist and composer. Welcome to the ProgCast, Andy West. How are you, Andy?
I'm great. Thank you very much for the intro, Greg. I appreciate it.
Well, it's the truth, isn't it? I mean, we're talking about what time of your life do you run into this Steve Morse guy? And better yet, back it up before that. What's musical life in the West home growing up?
Yeah, okay. Well, haven't talked about that much. I've told the story of meeting Steve a lot, which I'll condense because it's been around.
But take me before that.
Yeah, so in Atlanta, which is where I grew up from the time I was about, I think in the fifth grade till I was in the 10th grade, so maybe 5 years, and or 11th grade, I don't know. It's the mid 60s, right? And so that was high school era for me. The big bands at the time, I mean, I remember very clearly the first time I heard Jimi Hendrix and Led Zeppelin and Cream and any number of those kinds of bands. All of those things had a massive effect on me. I mean, somehow I started playing. Actually, what the deepest influence I had prior to all of that really was the Ventures. Somehow I got into the Ventures very early on. And, I had a paper out, so I'd make money and I'd go down to Woolworths and buy a Ventures record, and that kind of stuff. And so I wanted to learn how to play guitar for that reason. And my parents got me a little guitar and gave me some lessons, and I learned how to play Walk Don't Run, I think was the first thing I ever learned on guitar. And just kind of noodled around. I didn't really get serious with lessons. It was expensive and I wasn't really that interested. I just kind of wanted to hear things and tried playing them, and one thing led to another. Somehow I met other kids my age who were played guitars and drums, and we started a little band. And I think the way I started playing bass was we knew what bass was, but probably a typical story. I think I broke two strings on my guitar, so I started just playing the low notes, and that turned into playing bass. So eventually I got a real bass. My first bass was a Univox Beatle bass, because of course I love the Beatles also. The Beatles were the first really big thing to me. I mean, Beatles, Dave Clark Five, Rolling Stones, but the Beatles were it. And, so Univox bass. Then
What's
through
your
high school.
favorite Beatles stuff? Let me interrupt you.
Yeah.
Favorite
What?
Beatles, favorite Beatles.
Oh, well, favorite Beatles. You know, um, I really like of course, Sergeant Pepper's and the White Album. I mean, those are just incredible issues, at the time. And but really prior to that, I mean, I was listening to really every album that came out. Revolver was quite a dramatic change, it seemed to me, for them. Even at that young age, I kind of recognized that as very different. Um, so but I wasn't really a tunesmith. I didn't know how to sing. I mean, I just, I was interested in playing bass, so for some reason. And after I got that bass. So we just started playing, and really, as a band early on, we just wanted to play songs that people wanted to hear. So we learned how to play, pop music of the day. And somehow I got in a band with people that were actually playing music that other people wanted to hear. So started playing at teenage high school dances and stuff like that. And I can't even remember. I mean, I'd have to, if I went back and started hearing the hits of the late 60s, I could probably pick out tunes and say, oh yeah, I played that, like My Girl or Otis Redding songs or, all that kind of stuff, right? But in high school, something happened and I got really interested in, again, those moments of Zeppelin, Cream, Hendrix. I mean, they really struck me. And I had one other really weird influence that you'll appreciate, which was a friend of mine who he invited me over to his house to play pool one day. And we were playing pool and he put on 2 albums. The first one was Terry Riley in C. So, I'm used to Zeppelin and all this stuff, but I'm hearing this and I was like, wow, that is really interesting and weird. And then the other one was East Meets West, which was Ravi Shankar and Yehudi Menuhin playing, right? And both those albums really stuck with me as like dramatic, and awesome. And so, but it just kind of got filed away. I mean, I didn't go down a deep path at that moment with that stuff, but I always remembered it, and, then, again, the real heavy era and the hippie era and, Airplane and everything else. I mean, I was just all into it. When I was in the 11th grade, my parents moved to Augusta, Georgia, which seemed like a throwback Southern town, from Atlanta. Atlanta was very suburban and modern and, cosmopolitan. I mean, for a Southern city, everyone spoke with an accent, but Atlanta
High school?
Yeah. In high school, but it was still a very progressive place, but Augusta was very Southern. It was really strange. Like when I moved there and my dad took me into the school to, get me enrolled and stuff. And we're talking to the guy and the guy says, well, of course, now you're going to have to get your hair cut, son. And I said, what, my hair's too long? And he said, well, yeah, it's way too long. You have the longest hair in school right now.
Right.
For a guy. So it was very backwards and weird.
Repressive.
But, yeah. And it was one of these weird places where one of the very few public schools was called Richmond Academy in Augusta. And it was founded in like the late 1800s or something. And they actually had an ROTC division. Yeah, it's like you would take ROTC in high school. So you'd go to a class and they'd give you these little wooden guns and they'd march you around outside. I mean, it was insane. It was absolutely insane. And so that affected me pretty greatly. But that was the place where I met Steve, and he was in 10th grade, I was in 11th grade, and we were both in the same French class, and that's where I met him. And the rest is kind of a long historical story, but those are sort of the origins. And when I first heard Steve, what happened was my friends in high school, one of the guys who had introduced me to a lot of different kind of music, blues and things, he was a drummer, he was older than I was. He said, yeah, we just played a gig in Augusta and it was like all rednecks and GIs, but there was a kid in the opening band. He was 15 years old and he played just like Jimmy Page. And he was like, you ought to look him up. His name's Steve Morse. So I knew Steve's name when I moved there. And it turns out he was in a class with me. So, that was a fortuitous kind of weird circumstance that led to everything else.
So how experimental were you guys at the very beginning of, what was it called the first time around?
Yeah,
Dixie Grits?
Yeah, Steve and his brother had a band. They were from Michigan, so they were like fish out of water as well, even more so than me. And they just somehow they came up with that name, and they were doing improvisation, doing songs that they liked. And honestly, when we would get together, we would jam. I mean, we would just do free jams, rock jams, whatever, a lot. And so that was kind of where it started. But Steve always had a pretty strong focus on, I mean, There was a part of us that just didn't care. We wanted to play what we wanted to play, right? But then there was another part when we had bands that we would try and get work and play gigs. We wanted people to like us. And Steve was very conscious of what people liked and didn't like. And, so he kind of tuned himself into that. But it still always kept true to his own, ideas, of course. But, we weren't really radical or anything, although we did a lot of jamming back then. It was fun.
I think it's an interesting moment because even as I'm experiencing what if Dregs of the Earth era in real time in high school, I'm already studying classical composition and counterpoint and the idea of putting a piece together. And I'm aware of contemporaneously that there's this Dixie Dregs band and they play chamber rock.
Yeah.
To my knowledge, to my taste. And I look at that and I really feel like between the Dregs and Gentle Giant, there was really ear training going on listening to your beautiful music. And I think that a lot of people would recognize that we were spoiled rotten by such care taken in the writing and in performing of this incredible instrumental music, because don't ever forget what it meant to sell instrumental music to a larger audience at any time in history of music consumption. So
it's truly, I mean, I recognize that completely because I remember very clearly when we did, this album, The Great Spectacular, at after Steve was graduating from college, and they let us record at the University of Miami studio there. And then he had the wherewithal to figure out how to get some pressings. And then he and I went to New York City. It was literally it was like a stupid movie of two hicks, who didn't know any better, going to New York trying to sell our record, and the commentary back then. You could still kind of get in, although I do remember we went to Electra in Manhattan, and we said, we're here to talk to somebody. And they're like, what? Yeah, we got this album. We want them to listen to it. And she says, well, we don't take anybody in off the street, kind of thing. And so it was literally insanely hard, and there was no social media. There was no way to promote that, hey, people like this stuff,
Other than you're playing these shows and you're proving it live. And that was my experience. We drove up to Connecticut from New Jersey in high school to hear you guys play at some ballroom with an opening local band. And you guys were debuting stuff that was still yet to be named on Unsung Heroes. So, that period is just explosive in terms of composition and accomplishment, in terms of what we came to expect to be an excellence in having a band, that we were spoiled that way.
It was extremely rare because I mean, all of the people in the band were, I was kind of dragged along by Steve. He said, play this. And I had to learn how to play it, so I would. And so I was part of it for that reason, because I would continue to learn this crazy stuff. But the other guys in the band were also accomplished musicians. And, all of us dabbled in writing, but none of us, well, let's just put it this way. We all recognized Steve's ability as a composer and loved his music and knew that it was really special, and none of us were capable of doing that at that moment, and that kind of stuff. So, there's two sides of this. There's the side you're talking about is something that we all in the band experience too. It's like, wow, what is he doing? How is he coming up with this stuff? And, he used us as his sounding board. He knew that he could come up with music that we could play. So it was a rare thing and very cool.
How were you presented with material at the beginning? Tapes?
No, everything. Okay. So it's so old school and so interesting when I think about it now compared to how it is now. we would go into a room, all of us together, and Steve would say, okay, I got this idea. I'm pulling it together, and he'd play like a few chords or parts of a section, and then he would, show me the bass line, Rod would hear it, and he would just learn, like he'd start to kind of feel through a drum part. And then if the bass line was really challenging, I would learn enough of it to go into another room and work on it. And then he'd work with a keyboard player. It was all ear. Let's put it that way. Nothing was ever written. Nothing was ever recorded. It's like, get in a room together and learn the shit from scratch and then play it. And it would take sometimes, days or even weeks to learn a song, to where we could play it all the way through, but we'd have sections we learned, and we'd rehearse them until they felt right. And, he would change stuff on the fly. He'd like decide, I don't really like this part, try this, That's how it went. Yeah, at least that's my memory. All of us have slightly different memories of everything at this age.
Really, in what way do you think?
Pardon me?
In what way do you think?
Well, I mean, I don't know specifically about that, but there are things that, as we get together now and we kind of rehash the old days on occasion, or stories will come, anybody that spends as much time together as we did, there are sort of events in our past that we all have a shared memory of, right? But everyone will have a slightly different memory of what that person said and what happened and how this went down, that kind of thing, right? So I usually preface everything when I'm talking about something I remember, that I usually say, well, I could have dreamed this, but here's what I think it was.
Well, I can tell you, I vividly remember my high school prog rock, jazz rock band, Modern Art, played What If and Travel Tunes
Oh, nice.
of yours.
Yeah, that's fun.
And that for us was, a sort of a level that we were aspiring to play that and Ornette Coleman tunes and Zappa tunes and all of those things at once, and really just being wide open. And it seemed like you guys were really a thing unto itself. Sort of like what all the guys in Gentle Giant told me. We were our own standard. We didn't really listen to other bands. And it seems to me like the Dregs always had a musical mission that included really, besides rigor, fun, and a sense of drive, and it's also a sense of melody.
Yeah.
Which I think is so important when we're talking about what you're doing. Andy West, tell me about working with Ken Scott.
Yeah, Ken was amazing. I mean, first off, what's really interesting about him is, well, of course, it can't go without saying what fans we were of Mahavishnu Orchestra and how influential they were, and I think I've said it many times, but we learned pretty much all the tunes on Birds of Fire and Intermounting Flame, to play. We would play them, and so there was a lot of learning that went into that. Now, what Steve took out of that compositionally, there's a couple of songs that he wrote that I think are very clear derivatives, but the whole idea for violin and guitar was triggered when he heard Mahavishnu in the cafeteria at U of M, so that's undeniable, but it's just okay. Now I've lost my train of thought on where we started.
And they were playing schools.
Yeah. They played at the U of M. I mean, I remember Steve wrote me a note saying, I heard this band at the cafeteria that were just unbelievable. And we had occasionally communicated by mail, regular mail, which is shocking. I wish I still had some of those notes. That'd be fun to pull out, where he told me about Mahavishnu, and then I had never heard of them, but then I got a Cream magazine, which had one of those little plastic things inside that had it had Meeting of the Spirits in it. And I put that on and I was like, oh my God, that was another moment. You know, it was like, it was that dramatic. It was so, it's like, of course, I knew nothing about McLaughlin. I knew nothing about Miles Davis, John Coltrane, any of that stuff, right? I mean, I didn't know anything about jazz at all. And I heard this stuff and it was literally like it was coming from another dimension. You know, I didn't know where it came from. I had no idea how anyone could even think like that, you know?
So you hadn't heard Zappa.
Well, I'd heard Zappa, yeah. And I was a fan of Zappa's stuff, but not as deeply. It didn't strike me intellectually or emotionally in the same way. It was just cool and different, you know, like the Waka Jawaka album and you know, the Roxy and you know, that whole era of Zappa. But you know, speaking of Zappa, it's really interesting because when I listen to his later stuff now, kind of like the Keneally era live stuff, you know, so to speak,
Yes, sir.
shocked. I'm like, how did I not know that this was happening? You know, kind of thing. And it was incredible and it was huge. So, you know, I don't know. It's so strange. That was a whole conversation for sure. But I wouldn't say he was someone that I mean, I did have a Frank Zappa poster on my wall. So, you know, there's that.
But yeah, the 88 band, not to be trifled with,
No.
certainly had teeth and certainly had a grip on Frank's music in a unique way. Just was very short-lived.
Yeah, yeah.
Um,
I mean, I
yeah,
saw Zappa twice in the early days. I saw him with the George Duke and the Turtles era, you know, kind of thing. And you know, it was incredible. You know, it was great. But
so what were these venues where you would catch these shows?
well, the Zappa things were one of them was at Atlanta Baseball Stadium. They had this thing called the Cosmic Carnival where they had Frank Zappa, Traffic, Albert King, the Almond Brothers. I mean, it was a very eclectic. The Hampton Grease Band played there. You know, it was a really weird thing that made no sense whatsoever, you know, but it was cool. And the other place I saw him was in Atlanta, not a like Atlanta Civic Center Hall or something. I mean, you know, it was like I don't remember. It was somewhere in Atlanta, and it was a regular show, you know, kind of thing. But yeah, you know, the South, man. I mean, I saw Cream in they played at Chastain Park, and it's an outdoor amphitheater in Atlanta with like a shell, you know, kind of thing.
Hmm.
Um, you know, that was mind blowing. It was amazing.
And all of this is happening simultaneously with Miles and
Yeah,
simultaneously with
exactly.
this post Hendrix electric world, right?
Well, you know, that's one of the things that's so fascinating to me because, you know, I went to the University of Miami, but I was actually there studying cello and playing in the rock ensemble with Steve. And, you know, the first day I walked into the jazz school there was a picture of Coltrane on the wall, and I asked someone, "Who's that?" You know, and they looked at me like I was a freak. Like, what do you mean? You don't know who John Coltrane is? You know, it's like no. And so I didn't honestly until the '90s, like the early '90s, I had this weird sort of intellectual renaissance where I all of a sudden listened to Coltrane and went, "Oh, what?" and just went back through the whole catalog and then discovered all these other people in the tree of that whole thing, you know, going into Monk and even more obscure things, Dolphy and all these people, you know, that it just like and then when YouTube came on and you could see some of the environments these people are playing in and you could see them doing it, you're like, how did this even happen? You know, I mean, it's incredible. So it's great that that history has come alive in a lot of ways, you know, or is available to come alive if you want to dig into it.
Yeah, and you're talking about the 90s, which is really, I guess, the thing that brought the two of us together. which was that you heard the sign of four
Yeah,
with
yeah.
Metheny, Bailey, me, and Wertico. And then you were interested in my other projects. And it's funny because so much of the organizational skills that I used in, say, free improvisation, is thinking of the individuals as voices. So this idea of voicing and this idea of counterpoint that I was so spoiled by with bands like Giant and the Dregs, really filtered into my musicality when I was sort of, cast adrift in this world of so-called free music, but thinking like, well, what am I? What is my role in this rhythmic
Yeah,
display
yeah,
that's going on? And do I want to go with or do I want to go against? Do I want to pose another idea? What's a part? And so, so much of this is coming from an era where we were just slathered with melody and lines,
yeah.
strong
Well,
bass
and it's
parts.
all it's all still there for influence, and there's live avenues and musicians who are exploring these kinds of things in ways that haven't been conceived of. But it's I don't think you can take it all in at once. It's like when I think about it, I think, well, what would my life have been like had I actually, like I was exposed to Terry Riley and Ravi Shankar and this kind of thing in high school, and it stuck with me, and I always remembered that. And when Mahavishnu came around, I was like, oh, it's kind of like they're drawing from that, and then but I didn't really know much about it. And now, of course, having lived so long, I've experienced a lot more of this music, and sort of gotten into it in different ways. But when I think back on myself in my 20s, I was very focused on the things that were just, maybe it was just the level of exposure was more limited. And so even knowing about somebody like General Giant was kind of a rare thing, and if you did know about them and you could understand them and appreciate them, that was also not common.
So did you
Uh,
and Steve have that in common?
well, yeah, I mean, Steve liked all kinds of music, but he wasn't really so much of a deep listener, you know. I mean, he liked General Giant, he liked a lot of stuff, but he wouldn't like repeatedly listen to stuff that I know of. I mean, he had a different way of hearing music, I think.
So were you just sort of witnessing him putting ideas together and then you were working with him to make them real?
Well, yeah. I mean, he came up with these songs and we wanted to play them, you know, and we all wanted to play them. I mean, we were a band in the true sense of the word. Um, but the musicians in the band were supporting his compositions. So it was just, we would love it. I mean, we would always be surprised. It'd kind of be like, I wonder what he's going to come up with next, type of thing.
I
It was,
remember that sense of when you finally got to I'm freaking out,
yeah,
that this was now you guys were really just reaching for the highest level you could at that moment in time. And there was that sense of striving with the Dregs that was so exciting to us and
yeah,
so inspiring. So I remember that. I remember thinking, when Cat Food was an untitled funk tune,
yeah,
that, okay, so these guys are really now thinking about lines discussing with each other and lines layering, a divided we stand, and all of these things that were really audible.
yeah,
See, that's the thing. It's, I know that, and I look forward to talking with Steve about this, but just this idea of really uh, hooks.
yeah.
That what do you have to trade on in an instrumental setting? When I spoke to Quincy Jones for the Yale Oral History of American Music, he told me I try to give people 4 to 5 things to listen to at a time.
Yeah.
And so often say that the jazz fusion era is predicated upon a musically educated public, where there would be basic education in grammar school, in
Yeah.
grade school, where once a week, maybe somebody would come in and play piano and you'd sing along. And then
Yeah,
that would progress, right?
it's really interesting because I know what you're saying and I agree with you. On the other hand, it's like I've had these moments where, um, so I had a career in software development also, right?
Yes.
When I got deep into it and I got pretty good at it, and then when the internet started to really become part of the world that I was in, where, okay, now you're no longer dealing with these closed systems that are just business oriented systems. You're dealing with this interactive thing where, it's all over the world and then so on and so forth. To me, when I learned how it worked, like how packets are formed and transmitted and routed, and how, it just works, right? Mostly. I mean, the internet does work. To me, I was like, everybody needs to know about how this works. Everybody needs some understanding of how a freaking telephone works, or how electrical power comes into your house, or how plumbing and a toilet works. Like, to me, that's how I think. I think everyone should know this stuff because everyone uses it and it's part of their lives, and there's a value in understanding the history and the depth of things that you're surrounded by, right? So the reason I'm giving you this story is because I had the same feeling about music. People should know more because they could appreciate it more, right?
Yes.
But then there's this other part of me which is like, yes, but why? And you can't force it on people. And the same is true with appreciation of literature or movies.
But offer it freely. Take it or leave it. But offer it. Why hide it? I mean, there was a thing, it's aspirational. I
Yeah,
mean, I just think that I was young enough to be there when excellence and musicianship and quality of construction of the music was audible.
yeah.
And we were like, well, that's what we need to do.
But here's the
See,
thing.
that's the thing.
Here's the thing. You have to go to a point of origin further back than just presenting something. Somehow, and it's almost like magic, right? Somehow people have to be open. They have to have an opening to let themselves in. I mean, I think that the opportunity, this is why, everyone thought, oh, fantastic. Now the internet is here. Education, facts are available around the world. People are going to learn all kinds of stuff. It's just now it's all out there for everyone, where it was previously hidden and they prevented from getting to it. And you know what? It didn't matter. In fact, the opposite has happened. People have gotten dumber because of it. So it's like, I don't think there's a conspiracy to hide this stuff so much as there's something rotten in the core of our culture that doesn't value certain things. It's just not valued, So,
But we continue nonetheless.
yeah,
I
right.
mean, this is the thing. The Dregs are reuniting. There's going to be a southern leg. There's going to be a northern leg. Tell me about that, Andy.
Well, yeah. I mean, we're trying to cover the ground. We know there's a lot of people that appreciate this music. And also I mean, this is kind of weird to say, but it's like and I don't know if Steve feels this way, but I know that Rod and I have talked about this. It's almost like a cause, right? We feel like people should have this music available. They should be able to hear it,
Yes, this is
I
an
mean,
option.
that's how I feel about it. And I know that he does, and it's like, so that's kind of the reason. It's not like, oh, yeah, maybe we can go make some money, No, I mean, we expect there's an exchange, there's a transactional exchange. When you put this much work into something, you want some evidence that it's appreciated in some way. Well, okay, that's capitalism, right? but that's not the motivating factor. The motivating factor is the love of the music, and we want it to be heard. So that's why, there's Northeast. Okay, we're doing as many as we can. I mean, we haven't really gotten strategic about it. It's not like we're a band who all lives in the same place. And in our 20s, we were a united front completely, and nothing else mattered. But now it's like, everyone has lives, and it's not that it's secondary, it's just that it's different. So the best we can do is say, let's play what we know, and let's try and deliver it in a way that people can have it, So that's really it. And yeah, we want to play out west. I mean, we have memories. All of us have feelings about every part of the country. When we were growing up, every part of the country was different. It wasn't a monoculture in any sense of the word, I mean, America doesn't really have a monoculture, but in a way, it's all the same, right?
Over time.
Yeah. Yeah, it's all the same all the time, whereas even in the 70s, very different, very distinct difference between Birmingham and Atlanta, between the South and the West Coast, between Texas and Minnesota. You know what I mean? It's like now, not so much, right? And I remember seeing that transition when we would travel around with the advent of malls and nationwide franchises. All of a sudden you saw Wendy's everywhere, all of a sudden there was Arby's, all of a sudden there was, there's these kinds of gas stations. There's like Kmart's everywhere,
Right.
kind of thing, right? That was the beginning. And of course we know where it all led. It all led to Amazon.
But you were there at an interesting period, which is what I call the DIY period, where
Yeah,
the only way to really do it was to do it.
that's
And
right.
Pat Metheny is a friend, and he tells me that, basically what it was get in the van and go and play wherever they will have you and make $100 and go to the get in
Yeah,
van and go to the next one.
right.
And that was the ethos. Am I far off?
No, that ethos still exists to a certain degree, to the degree that it can. It's tough, and many times people have to reach a much higher level of achievement even to just do that. And they don't really like. Oh, okay, perfect example. You know who Nick Barch is, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I saw him play in Mesa last night. I think it was. Was it last night? God, incredible. Um, my days are packed now. There was like 30 people there. Now, this is a guy who has dedicated his life, and he's carved his own niche in music. It's very interesting. It's very hypnotic. It's very repetitive, but it's also very accomplished in terms of what he does. But it's not something you can easily categorize as rock, jazz, country, whatever. It's none of that. It's not new age. It's something else. And Phoenix has 5 million people in the metro area, and there's like 30 people in a room. So how does that even happen? You know, yet he's doing it. Somehow he found someone to do it, and he's out playing. And he did like a 2-week tour in the U.S. of different little places. I'm sure they made some money. I mean, they probably didn't pay to do it, but they probably didn't make a lot of money.
I mean, look, I've been doing the Mahavishnu Project on and off for 20 something years.
Yeah,
And you see it wax and wane, and you see that over time it becomes more important in some way to young people. I think that's really the only way that anything's going to happen anyway.
yeah,
Is it has to then like jump to the next generation, and certainly did in my case with my son and with his friends, and just the idea that the writing is going to be complex to the point of you're going to follow the melody, and there are some creative ideas for melody, but it really does come from the top down. Isn't
yeah.
that fair?
Well, what do you mean by the top down?
The melody is really what is constructing everything
Oh
else.
yeah, 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 yeah. Well, people are tuned in. More people are tuned in to rhythm, and I would say simple rhythms than anything. You know, So oftentimes, if a rhythmic element and melodic element together is, the key really to a lot of, people just sort of paying attention initially. Unless they're already tuned. I mean, if you're already tuned into free jazz, you're going to be open to a lot more things,
Yes.
but you have to go through a path to get there, unless you're just, I mean, some few people, I mean, like I can't forget, I mentioned the key sort of like outside influences and then the internal influences of the Dregs. But, when I met Henry Kaiser, who, he introduced me to a whole other world of stuff, and for whatever reason, at that moment in life, even though I had been part of a very precise, highly technical, fusion band of sorts, right? Whatever you want to call the Dregs. I really liked this guy, and he exposed me to so many different, unique things that it tweaked me in a lot of ways, and I just got into it. So, we've maintained a, 40 years almost relationship of doing stuff together, and it's all been interesting and different.
Yeah, tell me a little bit about Crazy Backwards Alphabet.
Well, yeah, so that was one of these things where Henry's always been, first off, he's a very outgoing personality. So, he'll talk to people, and if they will talk back to him, they will become friends and they will learn about things from each other, and he's almost like a connector type personality, because every now and again he'll call me and just say, well, I know this guy's this incredible player, and, do you want to try and maybe, do something? Yeah, sure. Why not? But it's just that whole type of, the Crazy Backwards Alphabet came about in exactly that way. Oh, I met this crazy Swedish drummer who, is like a really interesting guy, and maybe we could do this record together, and he was going to be here in the States for some reason, and blah, blah, blah. Oftentimes it's like that kind of accidental thing, and he'll just pull people together. And so, yeah, sure enough, I don't remember the whole experience. I'd have to go back through it in our mind, but I do remember, okay, went to the Bay Area, and Henry had a friend who had a studio. And so we just went into a studio, and he just orchestrated us playing stuff together. And it all kind of fit, we all sort of like, and both Henry and Michael, who's the other drummer, were huge fans of Captain Beefheart. And of course I knew who Beefheart was, but I never listened to his music. I just never did. And so Henry started playing me stuff. Okay, we're going to do this song, and it's like, I'm listening to this stuff, and I'm like, it's so different. It's not rhythmically precise, yet there's a kind of organic precision to it that's different than what, you might think,
Yeah,
and so, I mean, I don't know how to explain it. Beefheart is one of those inexplicable things almost. But, we started playing, and then Henry's like, oh, I know John French. Maybe he could do it, And so called up John French. John French came up, and we played two drummers on some things with just John, some things with Max Menko. So it was a whole thing, and it was really cool.
Well, don't you think that Beefheart was its own kind of counterpoint?
Well, yeah, I mean, it was its own thing for sure. I mean, Beefheart, the nearest I can equate Beefheart to, in terms of maybe something that people who don't normally relate to Beefheart would relate to, but also don't normally relate to what I'm about to say, is somebody like Tom Waits, right? When you listen to Tom Waits, you can't think in traditional ways. You have to think in a non-traditional way about what he's doing. And then it becomes amazing, right?
Yes, right.
So,
in for a penny, in for a pound. But when you're in, yeah, it is. It's amazing because that person's voice is enrapturing. And it's bringing you into this other universe, and they're going, look, this is what's happening. Sam with the showing scalp flat top, particular about the point it made. And you're like, what? Okay, well, tell me more. you know,
Yeah.
it's funny that way. And I think that, it also calls into question, you lose so much of the audience when you remove the voice.
Yeah.
It's tougher. And yet, there were times even when the Dregs had vocals by who was the singer at the time?
Well, we had Patrick Simmons from the Doobie Brothers and Steve Walsh from Kansas.
Oh wow, yeah.
Yeah,
And
that was
Alex,
cool.
the
Oh, and,
Scott
and Alex Lidgertwood from Santana.
Alex Lidgertwood, yeah, and
All
Brian
great
Auger.
singers. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, that's so cool.
That
So
was fun. And that was because we had played with each of those bands. We'd opened each of those bands and they sort of like, wow, you guys are good, kind of thing.
that's cool. I mean, what was the sense of the music of the Almond Brothers intersecting with the Dregs? Because you guys were both on Capricorn, right?
Yeah. So, well, the Allman Brothers were that scene in Park and stuff. And Piedmont Park was a place where bands would play. And I thought they were great, but they were like a blues band, I mean, it was kind of like it was a groove thing, and they looked like hippies, they're like country hippies kind of thing. And so they weren't really, I didn't equate them at the time with bands like Zeppelin and Hendrix and that kind of stuff, you know. Um, and actually, what's really odd about it is, I mean, I'm kind of, it's kind of weird to say this, but in many ways, I didn't really recognize their greatness, at that moment because I was into Gentle Giant. It's like
Yeah.
now I can listen to Gentle Giant and the Allman Brothers in the same state of mind and get both, really deeply. It's amazing, and Gregg Allman, his vocals, and the whole band is amazing, and actually their whole history is fascinating, but we didn't really have anything to do with them except for the fact that um, Twigs Linden, who was one of their main road crew guys, and Chuck Leavell, who was the keyboard player in the later version of the Allman Brothers, both heard us play in Nashville at the Exit Inn. And they were like, holy shit. And I think Chuck called Phil Walden and said, you got to hear these guys, kind of thing. And then our manager at the time got in touch with Phil and he said, yeah, we'll come down to Macon and play and I'll come listen to you. So we got a gig at a club down there. He came out and heard us play. And the next day he said, okay, I'll give you guys a deal. We can do a record.
Mm.
And that was like, oh my God, finally someone, so that was the intersection. And Twigs became part of our crew. I mean, he's on the back of the Free Fall album, and we have the song Twigs Approved. And, he died tragically in a parachuting accident while we were on the road. And it's just a really weird, the whole history is very strange and complex, but
he had a special role within the organization, didn't he? I mean,
oh yeah.
something being Twigs approved was no small thing. Am I wrong?
Well, yeah. I mean, we were clueless about what it was to be on the road. He'd been on, he'd been. I mean, they played with Mahavishnu, with Zappa. They played around the world, and Twigs was part of that whole thing. And so with him, it's like he would look at us and it'd be like, well, that whatever you're using for that cabinet is not going to last. You need to get something better. You need a case for this. Here's how you got to be when you go on stage. And, he taught us things like, okay, the most important thing in being an opening act is getting on and off as quickly as possible. Then the headliner will respect you, kind of thing. And so he was, he was like our mentor in that. I mean, he was like like the guy in Wayne's World, the old guy who's like, the English guy who's telling him, oh, here's how it is, Well, yeah, that's right. It is how like it is.
That's right. I mean,
So
it's funny. Mike Watt said the three rules of the opener are don't stall, don't bogart, and don't mosey.
Yeah, that's right. That's absolutely right. And you know, when you learn that, it's amazing because it's just the truth, you know, let's put it that way. And so we learned a lot from Twigs. And I mean, he managed to just get us together and get us to be like road worthy, you know. So that was cool.
And did you feel that there was a real loyalty in the fan base? I've always felt that the Dregs concerts were special events. Wherever I would travel to see you guys, and there was always just this sense of like this was something really, meaningful, like hearing the hereafter could just be just a very gut-wrenching experience. And those pieces meant a lot to people in a way that I didn't get to see the original Mahavishnu, but the idea of how do you make this exciting and a varied variety experience musically for people, a dynamic experience. And really, it's a lot to do with there's fun, there's funk, there's a lot of musical ideas going on. There's melody, there's counterpoint, there is atmosphere. So I just felt like groups like the Dregs were a distillation of so many things that we loved about Return to Forever and Mahavishnu and Weather Report. And I also, Andy, wanted to ask you about the country thing, because really that's what got me interested in bluegrass and newgrass, was hearing the Dregs play instrumental country music. And I thought that was such a cool regional identity stamp on the band, that like, you know what, there's this other kind of weird music. It's kind of the newgrassy thing where we're reimagining the lines and all the shit that goes on in cool bluegrass music, right?
Yeah. Well, okay, so first off, the um the attachment to the music is really touching to many of us, right? Because some people are very attached to it. You know, it means something to them. And what's cool about it is I mean, we are sort of the icons of it in a way, having done it. But at the same time, it's not so much about us as people. You know, it's not like we're rock stars or something. You know, we really are about the music, you know, and about delivering the music. So yeah, we're the guys who played it. Steve's the guy who wrote it, but the tunes are the tunes, you know.
Mhm.
The recordings are the recordings, and people do have a strong feeling about that. Some people do, you know. I mean, it meant a lot to a lot of people, and that's great because it meant a lot to us. We weren't doing it for any other reason other than this is what we do, you know. The bluegrass thing, it was always, I mean, that's something that Steve just did, and I have no idea, like, you know, it suddenly started kind of thing, you know, and something he heard, you know, he's probably told the story many times of why he got into that, or, you know, and he can cite all of his influences, you know, and Steve doesn't have to hear something like hundreds of hours to be influenced by it. He just has to hear something that he likes and go, oh, that's cool, you know, and take a piece of it and bring it out, you know, differently, put his stamp on it. So, you know, the country thing, I mean, some of those songs are freaking hard to play.
Yeah.
Um, you know, he always had, like, we were gonna do this song Patchwork. Rod really wanted to do it. It's got
Patchwork's hard.
Yeah, it's got this weird like 7/8 section that's really fast and but country, you know, and
Mhm.
it like makes no sense in many ways, but it's really cool. And but we decided not to do it because it's a little bit of a challenge. I mean, it's a very complex song, believe it or not. And you know, so he would always bring these things in, and you know, we started to have almost a formula, you know, with his his dramatic, more orchestral sounding pieces, the rocker, the country thing, the maybe Celtic, you know, kind of stuff, the more bluesy thing, you know, this kind of stuff. We just had that, and it was cool, and we all loved it, you know. But so the country thing was part of it, and the songs were really interesting, and I don't think any of us I mean, Steve probably knows more about that music than any of the other guys in the band, you know, because it's not something that we were drawn into or listened to very much.
Oh, I see.
Yeah. You know,
Yeah,
but
well,
his version of it, we loved it. You know, it's cool.
it was really cool. And it drew us in to, again, another regional thing. And I think that understanding music on a regional level is really important.
Yeah.
And there's certain things that only come from certain parts of the world and at certain times. And what's your take on it? And certainly the Celtic thing was always something that we enjoy about the
Yeah.
Dregs, you know, and that,
Well, I mean, yeah, it's funny. You just made me think about the country thing because you know the all of the country songs, Patchwork, Gina Little Breakdown. I'll just pick, you know, all these things.
where's
What kind of
Dixie?
country song has a section with a bass melody in it?
Mhm.
You know, and all of a sudden there's a melodic figure that I'm playing. You know, I mean, it would be like that. Like you'd be teaching us stuff. Okay, here's where a bass melody is going to be. So you know, I mean, crazy.
Yeah, it's clear to him and he just has to explain it to everybody and then it all works out.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean that's fantastic. So you guys are going to be playing a lot of things that you didn't play last time around?
Well, we're doing, I think, 8 songs that we didn't do, and which means we're doing like 10 songs that we did do, you know.
Mhm.
I mean, there's a couple of the iconic Dreg songs, but yeah, it's really neat. And it some of them, well, they're all fun in their own way. Like last time we did a version of Leprechaun Promenade, which was the one that was on I forget which album it was on, but it's a very floaty song, you know, and it's got these little parts.
Lee da
Yeah.
dee da, lee
And
da
yeah.
dee da.
So we're doing the one that we actually did a rearrangement of. It was when Ensoniq was a company and they did a sampler, and we were friends with those guys, and they said, "Hey, you know, we'd like you to do a little demo of our new sampler, and we'll give you guys keyboards and pay for the studio if you want to do it, you know, kind of thing." And so we did a demo. It's an Ensoniq demo thing, but Steve had rearranged um, Leprechaun Promenade with this more kind of heavy triplet pattern going on in it, and it's really a cool thing. It's on high tension wires. I think he has a version of it like that, and so it's really fun to play that. And it's funny when I listen to it, I'm like, "Did I play this?" And he says, "Yeah, you played that." And the only reason I know for sure that I played it, there's a low D on it. And I know that Dave doesn't have a low D on any of his basses that I've seen.
Right. No, I had the cassette from Ensoniq, and I remember that was a big deal. The Dregs were reuniting, and
Yeah,
Take It Off the Top was on there,
right, right.
right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, every time that the Dregs come back, it's a special occasion, and it's so great to talk to you, Andy West.
Well, thanks a lot, Craig. I appreciate it. It's always we've had a couple of offline conversations that are very similar to this, although not these topics. So it's kind of fun.
Yeah, we can always get into it. So, looking
No problem.
forward to seeing you in the Northeast, and everybody go out and see the Dregs. What's the website where all the dates are listed, Andy? Do you know?
Yeah, well, dixiedregs.com is very minimalist website, but it does have the dates. Whenever we
Great.
get them, they're posted there. And I think they might be on Facebook too, but I don't know. We're not like social media geeks. So you can
Hmm.
always go to dixiedregs.com and find current.
Well, it's really been a pleasure to talk to you, Andy West, and everybody. Thank you so much for listening and all of your beautiful comments and words of support. You can always reach me at bendianmusic.com and tell me your favorite episodes and who you'd like me to try to have on the show. Looking forward to having Steve Morse in the future and keep talking about this incredible music, this American-made music that was just a wealth of all different influences just to make really good music. And that's really what it's about for me, I think, that
Well,
I
thanks.
enjoy so much.
I appreciate it.
So thank you, everybody. Hit like and subscribe and hit us on Patreon. Our guest has been the great Andy West, and we'll see you out there on the road, Andy.
Thank you.
Thank you.